I've spent the last 15 years trying to break as many world records and world firsts as possible, which I guess sounds like quite a selfish endeavour, but I'm that kid that never grew up, trying to do stuff that's never been tried before. So I've pedalled around the planet twice. I currently also hold the record for cycling the length of Africa, length of the Americas, done things like rowing the Atlantic, or trying to, but that's another story in itself. Trying to take a boat further north than anyone's ever gone before. I've always been fascinated by, really pushing human endeavour, and also telling stories, sharing that with a global audience, filmmaking, the documentaries. I've loved all of it. When I was a kid growing up, I was in the foothills of the Highlands of Scotland, and the bike was just an awesome freedom for me. I mean, like most kids, it was just a means to get around. I had a quite original start to life because I didn't go to school till I was 12. So going skiing pretty close to where I grew up, riding the ponies, riding my bicycle was everything I knew. I didn't see a football or a rugby ball until I was in high school. So it was freedom, and it was going on journeys. So, as a 12-year-old kid, I pedalled across Scotland. There was never a view that this would become the career that I've now got. But, that grew and grew and grew, the ambitions over the years, until when I was 22, I set out to pedal around the planet the first time. And again, you can only ever really see the next horizon. I had no idea it would become what it has, really being a part of that generation who are taking ultra endurance to the next level. I mean, we live in pretty exciting times. The last 10-15 years, the round the world record has gone from 276 days to 78 days. That is not marginal gain. So I'm proud of that. The guys and the girls who are at the forefront of ultra endurance these days, and the audience who've sort of enjoyed following that and taking confidence from it, and it's a huge part of what I do. Pushing what's possible, building the teams for these projects, and then getting the stories out there. But the bicycle, even though I've done lots of other stuff, ocean rowing, climbing mountains, endurance of all ilk, I'm best known for life on two wheels. I always joke about the fact that, as 6'3" and 90 kilos, I am not your typical pro rider. So the fact that I've smashed the circumnavigation world record twice in my life and have a whole catalogue of other firsts and fastest, I know what I'm doing. I'm a very resilient bike rider, and I've got, my whole life of experience. But, we don't live in a meritocracy. I don't think that I've smashed these records simply because I'm the rider with the best power to weight ratio, and I could win the Tour de France. Far from it. But let's be honest, those boys couldn't do what I do, and I couldn't do what they do. Horses for courses. I've got a life of experience to build up. You've got to be able to suffer well to do what I do. The last big race around the planet was 1,200 hours in the saddle. And to not injure, to not break down, to think your way through basically averaging 240 miles a day every single day for 2.5 months with a performance and logistics team of 40 people working around it. This is a massive project by cost and complexity. There's a lot more to this than you would see if you just thought it was one bloke on a push bike. So I think being the size I am, in terms of ultra endurance, has given me a resilience to injury, the ability to keep going. I always think of myself as a diesel engine. If I'm out there on expeditions that last for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, it helps actually to have the physicality, the form, the fitness to battle through these huge projects. I think if I was a stick insect, your average Tour de France rider, I'd fall over. So when I started, it was very much wild man. I was on my own. It was my mum at home with the maps around the kitchen table. I mean, this is like going back to me in my early 20s. Things have got much, much bigger and more complicated since then. So in my last project, thinking back to those early days where it really is sort of, a solo exploit, living on the roadside, the friendship of strangers, through to what we are now doing. I had a media team based out of Cape Town, base camp here in the UK running logistics, and then on the road between 6 and 8 people at any one time. That is a 3-year project costing a pretty penny. It's a scale and complexity that most people would miss. And because I've got the profile for doing these things, people approach me, every week about their big plans to take on global expeditions. And people are always very focused on the sport of it, be that sailing around the world or climbing Mount Everest, or most people are good at that stuff, like the thing they're passionate about, the sport they're trying to do. Most people completely underestimate the business of it. Actually giving yourself the time, the finance, recruiting the right team, the building blocks to even get to the start line of these projects, that's the hard bit. Most people don't get to the start line. So to give yourself the opportunity, to build the brand, to do all the things which I guess for the public who watch my documentaries and read my books, I think it probably slightly spoils the romance. It's the best kept secret, because some people might wish that I'm just the guy that never got a job. I fall out of bed and ride my bike every day. I love all that stuff, but to give yourself the opportunity to take on the biggest endurance world records on the planet takes a huge amount of coordinating, and it takes an amazing team. Early on in my career, I worked with an amazing filmmaker at the BBC, the great late David Peat, and he said something to me which has sort of stuck with me, and it's this idea that try and value people because of who they are, not what they do. And it's a line that I've always tried to use for myself as well. So when I'm recruiting somebody, it's because it's Laura, it's because it's Mike, it's because they have a life experience and a skill set, not just to do a job because they've been trained to do that, they've got the education, but because when you turn the heat up, when you put people under a hell of a lot of pressure, stress, sleep deprivation, whatever it is, they've got the ability to think clearly, communicate clearly, and act clearly. The people who have left my project in recent years, it's never because they couldn't do the job in a nuts and the bolts sense. It's always because, their behavioural change under pressure. So when I put my teams together, I always try and really sort of test people in terms of how they cope. Have they got that wry smile? Have they got that fire in the belly? Can they cope, with a healthy dose of sort of suffering and obsession? Because you have to have that. A lot of people say to me, I'd love to do what you do. And I always say, I think you like the idea of what I do because you've watched it on YouTube. And that's not a patronising statement. What I mean is that there's a reality behind the social media, behind the storytelling, which is a hell of a lot of duration, a huge amount of commitment. And there's a lot of stuff which is, as people often say, type 2 fun. It's no fun. It's really quite gritty, but you look back on it very fondly. It's the commitment, it's the teamwork, it's the ability to really know what counts that stacks up to the big result. So these world records don't make themselves. These world firsts are not easy to come by. And I'm not in the game for breaking anyone else's record. I've never pipped a record. We are always trying to create a leap in performance. So the last time I pedalled around the planet, we broke, and I will always say we broke the world record by 37%. We broke our target by 1.44%. You never do better than what you set out to do. So, what I love and what my team sort of know me for is that blueprint, getting it right, understanding, inputs, behaviors. How do you actually get a team to buy into the art of the possible? Not just as a big number on the wall, like this is what we think is possible, but genuinely, what are people expected to do every day? Cut the faff, cut the noise, shorten the timelines, get the job done. The plan that we created for pedaling around the world, what is sustainable? I would get out my scratcher at 3:30 in the morning, on the bike at 4, ride 4 times 4-hour sets a day, 16 hours on the bike, half an hour break in between. You don't need to ride that fast, 25 kilometers an hour, 15 miles an hour, but you need to do that consistently. Get back into recovery, 5 hours sleep, back on the bike, up at 3:30, on the bike at 4, and you do that every single day for 2.5 months. That will get you around the world in 80 days. It's 75 days of riding, 3 days flights, 2 days contingency. Every day your inputs are ride time, sleep, food and hydration. As an athlete, there's 4 things you can think about. My team all had their own sort of equation. So I'm getting in about 8,000 calories a day. It's a lot of fuel. 8 to 10 litres of hydration. And something we sort of stressed as a bit of a sort of metaphor for the way the project had to work. If we faffed, if we just lost a bit of time for 5 minutes every time I got off the bike, that would add a day to the world record. So, you know, don't tell me to ride the bike faster, just make sure I'm on the bike at 4 and not 4:05. So that's the geeky details which made this work. And, you know, 75 days riding, 3 days flights, we came home on day 78. We used 14 hours out of our 48 hours contingency, which I think, you know, there's a different perspective the way I see it and the way the public see it. The public see it as this massive leap from the previous record, which was 123 days. We did exactly what we said we were going to do. Marginal gains, in my humble opinion, are a bit of a hobby horse. They're quite overstated. You know, it's an easy thing to latch onto. What I mean by that is, of course, as an athlete, I'm obsessed by making things a little bit lighter, a bit more aerodynamic, making small changes which over the course of the journey stack up to a huge difference. But the risk with marginal gains is that you go straight to them. You get obsessed on the detail without actually standing back and going, what are the very basic ABCs that we need to get right consistently to make the biggest difference? So if you go straight to the 1% and the 2%, you can fill your day and your conversation with stuff which, yeah, is important, but you've actually not got the basics right. When 3 ladies came to me in the last year and a half and asked about help to try and break the female circumnavigation world record, which was standing at 144 days. My first question to all 3 of them was, what's your target? What are you trying to do? With your life experience, the resources you've got, you know, the skills and what you're trying to do, what are you trying to do? Because what they were asking me was all the marginal gains, all the details, the border crossings. And I said, I'll help you with any of that. What are you trying to do? And they said, well, we're trying to break the record, 144 days. And I said, well, that's fair enough, but if all you're trying to do is break somebody else's record, you might do that. But you'll never do anything more interesting unless you start out by figuring out what you're capable of. With your life experience, your resources, take a bottom-up approach. What should that stack up to be? You're not working back from the 144, you're working back from your behaviours or your inputs. So when the record was broken recently by 3 weeks, with due respect to a previous record, it's not working back from that. So get obsessed with marginal gains. Love the detail, but only once you've had the confidence to think what's the art of the possible and get the bigger, much bigger building blocks right. Because all of the projects that I've taken on are so massive and quite scary at the outset, it goes without saying that you have to just focus on what you can affect. You know, once you scale it up and think of the entire project, you know, you just wouldn't get out of bed. So it's interesting. I used to think that it was about standing in front of my team and saying, right, everyone, do we all understand what we're doing? And they'd go, yes, boss. They don't. Of course they don't. They understand their job. They understand what you're asking them to do. There's no way that anyone else in my team would set the agenda the way I do. So when I'm saying, like, this is what we're trying to do, I try and, that idea that, you know, you value people because of who they are, you know, not just the fact that they're a great physio or a logistics manager or the rest of it. I'll always remember riding out the Gobi Desert nearly a month into the round the world trip, and Alex, one of my mechanics, looking at me and saying, Mark, we're going to do this. And I said to him, Alex, of course we're going to do this. At what point did you not think we were going to do this? You know, I laughed about it. But the reality was he'd been working with me for 6 months. The penny had dropped. He got it. Like all the inputs, the behaviours, the things that we talked about in terms of this blueprint, he understood his job and he was doing it brilliantly. But the big picture, the entire scale of what we were trying to do, you know, it's always difficult when you're trying to do firsts and fastest to get everyone. There's no way anyone else would set that agenda. So that's quite a lonely place. When you're the person who's setting everyone up for the task, it's very much on you. I think people are quite good at sort of pitting themselves against the difficult if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, if it's a moment in time. I think where businesses quite often struggle to relate to athletic stories is the fact that, in businesses, success tends to happen over much longer periods than athletes compete over. In my game, it's not about being brilliant in any given hour. It's about being performance over much, much, much longer periods. And really understanding how you don't just perform today, but you perform tomorrow, the next day, the next day. Making sure what you do is sustainable. And that's a real trick. When I was breaking the world record for riding the length of Africa, I rode from Cairo to Cape Town. And a few months later, a team with a full support truck, I was on my own, went on the same route, which is of course not like for like at all. You've got 4 people, team time trial, helping each other out with full support trucks and not carrying their kit. For the first half of the race, we did it in exactly the same time, from Cairo to the equator. So I would ride steady, use the entire day, stop the friendship of strangers, getting through as effectively as I can. The racers, with a view to smashing this record out the park, rode for about 50% less each day, got to that middle of the Sahara Desert, got heat stroke, a couple of the guys had to take time out and really struggled over the Ethiopian highlands. It was a classic here in the Tortoise. We rode half that route, 3,000 miles, in exactly the same time. So my advantage is never smashing it out the park in any one given day. It's being able to do that with a view to waking up the next day and the next day and the next day. I've done 4 projects that last over half a year. The planning and the completion of these trips normally takes 2-3 years in the making. So I always encourage people in sport and in business to have that long-term approach, to understand what success looks like within different horizons. There's no point in turning up and just doing a heroic pep talk and saying let's smash it today if you can't get out of bed tomorrow. I think the main value of having an external speaker at any conference is if you've got a key message, something which is really, really important that a leadership team is sharing with everyone who's needing to put that into action. For that message to be reiterated with a different perspective from somebody outside of the business is priceless. Within an office, you can be banging on about the most important things, the things which are going to make a difference. But I'll be seen typically as an athlete, as a bike rider. But when people understand that the level of project planning, communication targets that we take to even start these projects, you can use any of my career as a metaphor for any project, any startup, any big business, if a business is just saying, look, we're quite happy with steady state, we're just, sitting in cruise control and we're pretty happy with the way things are, don't book me. I like being asked by businesses, by organizations which are going through culture change, who have big targets, who are trying to become more efficient, who are tightening their timelines, who have ambitions and have the quiet confidence to be able to do things differently. Those are interesting conversations. If there was a single takeaway from any event I do, I would like the audience to go away with a quiet confidence to take on what they believe is possible. I'm never going to tell people in a technical sense, how to do their jobs. But for me, it's about, self-awareness. It's about having the ability to make some changes, which might be quite small changes, but they stack up to big. But I never ever stand up and just do the same keynote every single time. So for me to say there's one give and take away from every time I speak would, I would, for my own sanity, I couldn't stand up with a, whether I'm presenting on analysing risk or putting together performance teams or the entire blueprint around margins or whatever I'm speaking about, something which we agree together between, the client and myself. There'll be a completely different take, and I'll pull out different anecdotes which I think really sort of back up the points that I'm making, and hopefully make for some interesting conversation and questions with the audience afterwards. But if there is one overriding outcome that I'd love everyone to go away with, is just a little bit of quiet confidence to go, do you know what? I can make a change. I can do things differently.